They're coming through thick and fast now. The latest mining business to announce plans to cut jobs in the South African industry is the Chinese Jinshuang Group, the group which controls a large stake in Wesizwe Platinum. It's warned that its platinum project, the project near in Northwest, is going to lose 75% of its workforce thanks to a restructure in operations. It's partly due to a sharp decline in metal prices, as we're hearing more and more, but also the operational disruptions brought about by load shedding and other factors. Person breaking that story today, Antony Sguazzin, who is the senior writer for Africa at Bloomberg News. And Antony, welcome to the Money Show this evening. There's huge pressure, of course, building in the South African economy, an enormous amount of pain building in the South African economy. And the company that now owns 45% of Wesizwe Platinum, joining the likes of Volkswagen and Anglo-American Platinum and Anglo-American and Sibanye, and no doubt others, in the fact that it may very well be shedding jobs.
Yes, Bruce, I think a lot of companies have, already shed jobs. We've seen Sibanye doing that. And also Anglo-American, which is a story I wrote late last week, is also consulting government about shedding jobs at both Kumba and Anglo-American Platinum.
Again, the things happen slowly, and then suddenly all at once. And it feels like all of the jobs chickens, so to speak, are coming home to roost at the same time because of this multiplicity of state failure.
Yes, I think that's the case. I mean, companies can only take so much. So, Transnet has had problems for quite some time. We saw last year that the coal shipments were at a 30-year low. Iron ore shipments, I think, were at a decade-long low. Things have got probably a little bit worse this year, so the companies are having a lot of problems. I understand that, Anglo-American in the form of Kumba is also running out of space to store the iron ore it cannot get onto the railway to the port. So therefore it will have to cut back on production, which means that they won't want to employ as many miners.
And
so that's the consequence.
Yeah, absolutely. Not even a weaker rand environment is enough to save us from ourselves, is it?
Look, I'm sure it helps, but in terms of platinum, the price has gone down quite a bit. The price of palladium, the important byproducts, have gone down even more. So, a slightly weaker rand doesn't really help that much.
No, it doesn't. I mean, is there any sort of sense that government is paying attention to these woes, or are we in still what has been very much a denial phase by government, which doesn't really want to own up to its role in what is playing out at the moment?
Look, government has come out with a very detailed transport plan to fix freight rail. But it's a plan. South Africa has a lot of plans, and these things take a long time to put in place. And that should see more private sector involvement on the railways, at ports. But it's not a quick fix, and a lot of the companies aren't going to be able to wait that long. So it's likely that in the short term, at least, there probably will be quite a few job losses, which is it's a problem for a country that already has such a high unemployment rate.
Of course, we think about it at this time of year and the run-up to Christmas. It's the sort of news that nobody wants. But it also comes at a terrible time for the ANC, which is at some point next year going to have to call an election in terms of the Constitution. And it's damned if it calls it early and it's damned if it doesn't. I'm not too sure how this plays out in that particular narrative.
Well, it can't help them, I'm sure. In terms of job loss for platinum companies, I'm not sure that's got much to do with the government. The platinum markets have turned. That's a global thing. But in terms of coal companies, Seriti and Glencore have entered talks to cut jobs as well. That was disclosed at least a month ago. And in terms of companies like Kumba, it's primarily due to the rail and ports. And those are run by a state-run company. So ultimately, the buck stops with the government, and the government's run by the ANC.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Antony Sguazzin, senior Africa writer at Bloomberg. Listening to all of that, the mining and labour analyst Mamokgethi Molopyan. Mamokgethi, have you managed to figure out in any sort of sense how big this jobs bloodbath could be?
Oh, it could. Good afternoon, Bruce. It could run to quite a couple of thousands. I mean, when you look at all the platinum belt and all the mining and the companies that are in there, and as the previous guest said, I mean, no matter what government, and there's been murmurings that the government senior officials in the party are trying to consult with companies to hold the job cards and retrenchments and notices of intention to retrench, but it cannot be helped. I mean, we have seen palladium and platinum plunged terribly since mid-2022. So it's really not surprising because mining companies that are not restructuring, they are running a risk of being exposed to costs, and they cannot sustain that.
And this is disastrous not only, of course, for the individuals that are losing jobs, but for the mining communities that have grown around the mines. Particularly, you look in Northwest and you take that road to Sun City and you go past Marikana, the famous Marikana, and all of those places. You just look at these huge, vast communities of people, all of whom are dependent on the viability of the mining sector. And we've done very little to change the fortunes of the mining sector, kind of depending permanently on high prices without too much thought for what happens when things pull back.
Yes, it's going to have quite a ripple effect on the communities that are around. I mean, in the Northwest particularly, there was already, as we have seen, the report that came out not so long ago from SGA, high unemployment rate. The country's ability to create jobs is not moving at a pace they anticipate. Government programs on employment and jobs is not moving. And even government infrastructure program seems to have lagged behind. So it's going to have such significant impact on the socio-economic being of people around those mines and mining activities. But also it filters down to, as we know, we've seen also a very detailed report about poverty doesn't beginning to be entrenched in South Africa. It entrenches that continuation of unemployed, not looking for work, not economically active, but also a complete stop in some of the economic activities around the areas where mining is taking place, often depressing the economy and the well-being of the people around that area.
Mamokgethi, thank you so much for your input this evening. Mamokgethi Molopyan, the mining and labour analyst. Before her, Antony Sguazzin, who wrote the big Anglo-American story of government trying to dissuade Anglo-American from cutting jobs ahead of an election. And it's unfortunately, the longer you leave things unattended, the longer you allow the state-owned enterprises to be gouged out in the way that the ANC allowed the state-owned enterprises to be gouged out. When things fall apart, they fall apart spectacularly and they fall apart all at once. And the knock-on effects are going to be felt by all of us for the next decade at least. That's assuming we start getting ourselves sorted out and beginning to resolve these problems sooner rather than later.